Larry Scott's been the commissioner out there. Well, no longer. As of this spring, a little bit later on in the spring, Larry Scott's going to be out. Why is it happening? Well, I think from a broad strokes point of view, you could just say they're not good enough. That's why it's happening. Well, that's true. But then you dive into the details where the devil always is, and you find many, many reasons. Okay, so I saw a bunch of good writing on this today. I thought Stuart Mandel probably did about the best piece that I saw. It was over on The Athletic, which is behind a paywall, so I'm not going to read any of it to you. But I thought it really surmised and encapsulated the mess that has been the Larry Scott tenure in the Pac-12. And let me just tell you, there are a million different reasons that you could point to. Here's what really struck me. It wasn't all that long ago that Larry Scott had some really good rub with the college football public and the Pac-12 public. He had been right there in the midst of, it seemed like, being on the precipice of negotiating what was going to be called the Pac-16, which was going to include Texas, and it was going to include Oklahoma, and obviously that would have turned this entire thing upside down. He also negotiated on the front end of his tenure a pretty darn good media rights deal. I mean, at the time, it was big money, and it was looked at as one of the standard-bearing contracts in the industry. Here's the problem, and this he has never been able to detach himself from. This has been a 100-pound weight tied around his ankle as he is hurled into the Pacific Ocean. That's graphic, so figuratively, of course. Larry Scott, I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine you're running a really good bakery, and you got the best muffins in town, and everyone loves the pastries. I mean, even the guy who normally doesn't order Danishes, he's getting your Danishes. You're going good. Business is good. And then all of a sudden you look around and you say, we got a good bakery here. Let's diversify. What you going to do? You going to open a steakhouse? Nope. Bar on the corner? Nope. I'm going to start myself an airline. But here's the problem. That's ambitious. But you got the money, you got the capital up front, but here's the problem. You can't really form any relationships. You've never been in the airline business. And so you can't get any airports to sponsor you and get you terminal space, and you can't get the pilots union on board, and you can't get any plane manufacturers to cut you deals. And so you just decide, I'm going to start my own airline. I don't need any of you. Imagine how ill-fated that concept sounds. And then imagine that's exactly what the Pac-12 did, only they didn't start an airline. They started their own TV network. They had no clue how to do it. A lot of great people have worked at the Pac-12 network. It's going to be a wonderful documentary one day. But they had never taken a swimming lesson, and they dove into the deep end. They started their own TV network. You got to understand something. Like, that doesn't sound ignorant on the surface to start your own conference TV network, because you may look around and you may say, well, the ACC's got one. Well, the SEC's got one. The Big Ten's got one. Seems like everyone's got their own TV network. They sure do, friends. But when you look at those logos, you don't just see SEC and network. There's a third thing that you see on that logo, and it's the letters ESPN. They have a massive media partnership. That's the foundation on which those network TV deals, all of which I just mentioned, have been built, except for one. The Pac-12, they ventured out into the media rights wilderness without a media partner. And they were as blind and as hopeless as the baker who starts his own airline. And that really has been, among many other things, probably the biggest downfall for the Pac-12 under Larry Scott. So the reality now is they've been fading, and they've been fading for a while. There's a massive revenue gap. You see the competitive gap, but I mean, it really all ties into the revenue gap. And the problem is it's not even frozen. It's growing wider and wider each year. Disastrous TV deals now, the network TV situation I just detailed. The Pac-12 presidents, they called them general managers in some cases out there, but the leadership and administration of the Pac-12, the one thing I'll say, if you want some optimism here, is it seems like there is a lot of synergy and a lot of continuity. I haven't really heard many tears shed for Larry Scott, and I've heard a lot of renewed excitement. They haven't even hired anyone, but they seem like they're on the same page. And that's what the sense of survival and kind of survival instinct will do for you. Everyone out there knows it's do or die time. Everyone out there knows a drastic measure needs to be taken, and everyone out there seems to know the next hire is obviously the most pivotal point in the history of this conference, and they're right. So what do they need to do? Well, they need to close revenue gaps, obviously. Now, that's easier said than done, and there's not just this great big one idea that's going to do that. In reality, it's going to be several ideas and everyone pulling in the same direction. I think, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, I think that they're going to have to, as part of that radical plan, explore some kind of conference realignment or probably a conference expansion model And I think if you were to partner with someone, it wouldn't be a TV network. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about partnering with the Big 12. What you wanted to get off the ground about a decade ago, a little less than a decade ago, and you couldn't, I think it has to happen this time around. Because listen, the Big 12, they're not exactly printing money either. They're in a little bit more stable position, but there's a gap between themselves and the big boys. I really think it could come down to, and this is not anything that's happening in the next year or 18 months, I really think the future probably holds some kind of realignment. I would be very surprised. I have to look at my watch to know what year it is. So it's 2021 right now. I'd be very surprised if in 2028, let's give it 7 years, I'd be very surprised if the Pac-12 was still the Pac-12 and consisted of the same 12 member institutions that it currently consists of. I'd be very surprised by that. They also just flat out need the football teams to do better. I mean, really, USC needs to be USC. Mario Cristobal and Oregon, I think they're doing their part. They've been a very quality product. The University of Washington needs to step it up. The Arizona schools have to step it up. UCLA football has to step it up. Stanford has fallen off mightily. They got to have better football out there. You can only do so much fundraising and negotiating at the TV network executives table. You got to have a product. Director Colin and I were talking about that earlier before we came on the air. You got to have a product. I mean, when we talk about the Pac-12 on Late Kick, we openly wonder, when we go back and we look at the data and analytics and we look at concurrent viewership, are we going to see a noticeable dip when we talked about the Pac-12? Or is it going to maintain consistent concurrent viewership? Lately, it's been the former, not the latter. People tune out. There's just not enough passion there. You're not going to hire a conference commissioner who comes and injects adrenaline into your fan bases. Only one thing can do that, and that is viable, consistently winning football product. That's what you have to have. So if you're out there and you're pulling for the Pac-12, you got an obvious rooting interest here. But let's say you live in Kentucky. I mean, you're a University of Kentucky fan, but really you're a college football fan, and you're of the opinion that there's not enough parity in the sport right now. Well, this is where your rooting interest comes in. If you think the sport's become too regionalized, if you think only a few are benefiting at the expense of the very many, well, this is where the change could come, one of them. You got to have a competent and consistent product on the West Coast, because right now, whether you like the perception or not, people look at Norman, Oklahoma, and outside of maybe one or two stops past Norman, Oklahoma, any given year, people think that the sport is irrelevant past that. And it shouldn't be that. Hasn't always been that. It shouldn't be that in the future. So I view a lot of those programs out there not as extinct. I view them as dormant. Hopefully a kickstart is coming on multiple fronts for the Pac-12.